So going back then to the agenda, as you see, we're now at 6. And this is something that is, there's too much of this, but for me, in 6A, the vote on a week ago at City Council left me in the middle, like cutting off the voice in the middle. At our last meeting, we had a splendid discussion as this subject came back again, that at the time we had sent a request to City Council about striking the exclusion of a new member of the board to not have a felony. It was a year ago that it went to them, and they basically asked to have it be included in other proposed changes. City Council has changed for the most part since then. So our intention was to prepare that language, which is rather simple in that, as was mentioned earlier, it is a striking of a section of the ordinance. And therefore, let me bring it up. An earlier part of the ordinance, no.
You're looking for 19-22C, I believe.
Thank you very much. 22C.
When you're done, Ricardo, if you would give me a chance to tell you exactly what happened, I would be happy to do that.
Okay. Yes. I'm just contextualizing for now. So as you can tell here in 1922, qualifications for membership of this board, you should have a reputation for fairness, integrity, and sense of public service. No city employee shall be appointed. And no one with law enforcement, current or past. And C, no person with a criminal, felony conviction or plea shall be eligible to serve on the CPRB. And then the mayor will look for balance and diversity. So our proposal last year, but especially as of a month ago, was to recommend to council to strike the C portion of 19-22. And Tony, as we were talking about it, just for me, as you get to addressing that, Carol, is if we are to be watching all of city council meetings, so we know what they're doing, I have to say then they should be watching ours so they know what we're doing, because right now it is one hand going one way and the other hand going the other way. So other members of the board on this, and then we'll turn the time over to Carol.
Yeah, Carol, I would be curious if you can address this as to when that side letter was added. It looks like it was the original execution date is from 2011. So, you know, I'm not sure when that was inserted into the contract. So can
I give you a little bit of history here? I think it would be useful. Is that all right, Ricardo?
It looks like they're just reinserting what was already included in the previous contract and had been since 2011. To echo what Ricardo is saying is that, yes, I mean, we presented to the board about this. Now, granted, it was not the same council. We presented to them about this very issue. So, you know, it's just surprising that something dealing with our board, the name of the board is in the side letter, and we have had no contact with them. And it's not been facilitated either. Is a bit shocking.
Okay. So Carol, before it's your turn, I want to make sure that all the board put their questions before you, so that then as you deal with them, it's all in one flow.
Well, no one's asking, just to be fair, no one's asking questions. People are making statements that involve assumptions that I would say are not correct. So I'll wait my turn, but I think perhaps if you let me go before there's additional comments, it might be useful. but I'll wait if you want me to wait.
I want
I
to
think
make
the board
sure.
should, yeah, let's get the board's input and then we'll get an explanation.
Okay, so your turn, Colum or Katrina?
I'd like to hear what Carol has to say. It sounds like she can tell us a lot more about this history, and I think I could use that history for sure. So I'll happy to wait.
And I'll wait too, because yeah, once she has, I might have some questions after that. So I would like to hear what Carol has to say as well.
And I'd be more than happy to answer your questions after I want to give a little bit of history first. And that history is, it's what I was talking about earlier. The side letter, Tony, you're right. The side letter is, they keep bringing the side letter forward, and just changing the dates on it. But it goes back to when the CPRB ordinance was passed. And there was, as one could imagine, there's, give and take and back and forth. And so there was a compromise that was struck that is captured. I'm sure there were multiple compromises, but there's a compromise that was struck in 19-22 about qualifications for membership. And that compromise is, on the one hand, certain people didn't want people with felony convictions on the board. And then the other piece of the compromise was, well, then we're not going to have anybody with a law enforcement background. So those two things go together. And when folks on this board, who are supposed to be creating an impartial environment, advocate for the removal of one of those pieces of the compromise without the other, that erodes trust that this board is impartial. So that's important to know, that those things go together. They were intended to balance each other out. So now we'll fast forward to the negotiation, and it is a negotiation when we come up with a contract. You're assuming that the negotiating team did not know what your preferences were, and that's not true, because I ensured that they did know what your preferences were. In fact, I think I probably shared the petition from the citizens that were, when they had asked for a variety of changes to the ordinance. So they knew what your preferences were, and I would say that there was a compromise that was struck that actually addressed what Katrina came to the council with almost a year ago exactly, which was the issue of you all took as at the time, the most important issue was you wanted to be able to have a video witness. And so Katrina brought that to the council. The council asked a bunch of questions, and then it came back, and there was no progress made on answering those questions. But the change that was made, the language that was struck from the side letter that has now been struck from your ordinance, is complaints against an officer must be signed and sworn by a person with personal knowledge of the incident, and language will be included in the CPRB ordinance that false complaints shall be subject to prosecution. So 3 things have changed, actually 4. You don't have to sign you don't have to sign the complaint. You don't have to swear the complaint. You don't have to be a first person witness. And if you file a false complaint, we will not seek to prosecute you. So, and the additional things that you wanted, they knew what they were, but it was a negotiation. So it got what had been brought to council a year ago. Now you can be a video witness. You could be a hearsay witness. You could say, my friend told me that they had an interaction with the police and it went down like this. And the person who is actually involved doesn't have to be, and it doesn't have to, there's no actual, there's no evidence. There's no statement that has to be made. It can just be a complete hearsay statement, and a complaint can be filed. So you actually got more than you had been asking for. So I just don't want you to think that the negotiating team didn't know what you were interested in. They did, but it was a compromise.
Thank you, Carol. It is true. That's been one of the many items on the list. Any other reactions or questions for Carol? Okay. So I want to add a couple of things, Carol, because I do want to validate that fact of first account is one that was high on our list, and it was on essentially in bucket 2, changes request to the ordinance, and we knew that it would take a while to percolate up, and then as it comes back down. So that's the number one. Number 2 has to do with the language and the balance of these of the felony and law enforcement members of the board. A year ago, our discussion ended up at recommending for the provision of, well, C to be eliminated, not B. But we decided at the time, and I have my notes on it, that the original parties, and I listened to your language, what was intended, what were intended. At the time, it was very much a balance between 2 groups that were duking it out to even form a CPRB. And I understand that much. But it was a year ago that we concluded in open discussion that those parties may or may not be before us or may not exist in the community, and that we were voicing the opinion of the board at the time, that is in 2020. So that to me is established because that's where we were, and my notes are validate that. The thing that comes to the point, and I'm contradicting myself from 2 meetings ago, I have carefully avoided not to weigh in too much at City Council because many of those discussions end up to be not only the 3 to 10 hour discussion, they end up convoluting a lot of good points and political points, and depending on where you're on the spectrum is where you end up. So for me, I want to go there when we have a clean recommendation as a board. As a person, we're each entitled to whatever. In this particular case, I was asked very specifically by not just members of the public, but by organizations to weigh in on the contract provisions. And for me, off the meetings, I gave also my opinion because I was asked to do it, and so I did. I feel on Sunday, before a week ago Sunday, I felt betrayed by seeing it there that it was, I understand that the negotiation was going. I mean, the contract's been over for a year, and there's a pressure for both sides to finish it off. But what I considered unfair is that we get sidelined when there is a particular item, no communication. Even if we don't want the communication to be foilable, because sometimes it's just, let's talk. It came up and it was gonna be passed and there was gonna be no anything from us. The courtesy from council to us was not there. And frankly, it went beyond that because I know that they had to do close a contract, but it's different when I show up to the wedding and I'm the one getting married, and I didn't know I was going to go get married, and that's what happened in this case for me. So whatever we choose to do, even if it's to be ignored, for me, it is a fair action to do when we are going to be sidelined anyway. That we at least have to put our opinion. Otherwise, why are we here? And if we're here just to hear a very limited set of anything, then it's not it's not an oversight board. It is a I board, AYE. And so for me, that's where it hurt. The eventual negotiation, it's something that's got to be done. And whether it's you as the representative of the city or there are some political actions, I'm very happy to concede when at least we're considered. In this case, a whole board has been contradicted without any other discussion on this particular point. So all the other points aside, because there's many that will yet be put forward, it's just not enough. So that's my opinion. I've asked others to give opinions, but what are we going to do about it is where I'd like to get to.
I'll say these changes seem, the ones that Carol mentioned seem good. I mean, just like the fact that we were disallowing third party complaints, I think was a bit unfair. And I think they recognize that. I think that's why they changed that. I think there must have been good discussion that took place. And I think we are being advocated for to some extent. I'd love to hear about some of that. I think this is the first I'm hearing that those changes were made, and it sounds like we need to update our ordinance to reflect that, if I'm understanding right. So we need to change our ordinance, among other things. So
Your
it
ordinance, your ordinance has been changed to update. We did that at council.
it strictly has, it has already been changed.
Yes.
So that's,
The final vote will take place on Monday, but they're just conforming amendments.
this seems good. I'm happy to see these changes. It just, like Ricardo said, it seems like I feel uninvolved, I suppose. These are good changes. I just feel we could have been maybe communicated with a bit more, but I'm happy to see these. These are good. I just wonder if we could have been involved just a bit more. But I'm new, so I don't know what that would look like. Thank you.
The one change had to be done per state law, the requiring of sworn affidavit. So I mean, that wasn't us getting our way. That was the state legislature voting to remove that requirement. So
Understood.
Yeah. So as far as it being advanced as something that we were able to get done, that's not what occurred. That was state law that overrid that requirement. As far as it being a balance, when this board was formed, that may be the case. But to characterize the people on this board as being, it's either cops or people with felony convictions, and we have to somehow balance those two out. It's a civilian police review board. So the idea of having a civilian police review board, with police officers on it doesn't make much sense. And I don't think it engenders any trust in the board if that were to be the case. But for the response to be, well, then we'll remove people with felony convictions, carte blanche, and we've discussed this before. It doesn't, the fact of the matter is there are civilians with felony convictions. That doesn't mean, they shouldn't be on this board. Whether or not we remove that and we get a flood of applicants, I don't know if that will happen. But, as Ricardo said, them not even discussing with us, especially, I know there were at least a few alderpersons that were on the board or on the council when we had put this forward, and to not be consulted, does sting a little bit.
So I want to share the agenda because it doesn't, again, intelligent people talk together, figure something out. If you notice on 6A, when we put it out as something on the agenda as the discussion, the urgency for me to do many other things outside of CPRB was motivated by what happened a week ago Monday. But I want to make sure that we at least have a method of communication that enables much better cooperation. And that for me means cooperation means at times we cede and at times another side cedes. But I want to request that other changes happening to the CPRB as a result of this contract is an open discussion. I know that there, that there are changes to happen because of ordinance changes, but implications to the CPRB out of this contract are a discerning scripture because there are so many sections and so many parts. If our ordinance does not reflect those situations that and are spelled out, we will be back here with another miscommunication. So I don't know at this point what other changes are there, because now I'm afraid that other things are in there that I don't know about, or that I don't know whether it's assumed state law or the so-called police Bill of Rights, to me, if it affects how and what we do, it's valid to be put here, and we should spell it out. So I'm open to suggestions, and I don't know, you guys as staff, you have to keep track of a lot of things, but how it affects your boards is one of those considerations. And so somewhere in there's got to be at least a domino effect in which we are one of those dominoes. So let me suggest the formalization then on as to this. I'd like for us to be at every council meeting, and that one person then report back as to anything that happened there that might influence us. We have no control over whether they actually come to us and they're present at our meetings. I've had a couple of the new members say they watch our videos, but in this particular case, I don't believe that they were watching last month's video because they're a courtesy person a friend, a colleague would have flagged something as a fait accompli even, but at least as a flag, and it didn't happen. And frankly, I don't want it to happen anymore on any other issue. And if we're going to have good communication, it means frequency for me. So I don't know what you all think about engaging ourselves anymore, but at least at the beginning of each meeting, the CPRB ought to be part of that meeting, even as a public. But it cannot happen again that this kind of miscommunication happens when there were so many warnings.
Could we consider asking the council to appoint somebody who would act as a sort of liaison to us, so that there'd be just one person whose responsibility it would be? Because when there are 7, 9 council members, I mean, it's whose job is it to tell us at that point, right?
And it could be that they feel that maybe it's our responsibility to know what's going on. Not saying that it is, because I don't finger point, don't know, not sure. But like Ricardo, I don't want any more miscommunication to occur, because it's like we're in the same house on 2 different levels, and people that are outside of the house are looking in and making their own assumptions, making their own judgments, making their own statements when they haven't walked in the house to see which level is going, haven't been on the top level, haven't been on, but they're making all of these assumptions about, hey, you're doing this or they're not doing that. So in order for that, the people that are on the outside of the house looking in, trying to make their own judgment calls, their own questions, their own assumptions, I think that having a presence at the city council by the CPRB, it will cut down on the lack of miscommunication that we seem to get. Not so, I don't want to say all the time, a lot. It shouldn't happen as much as it's happened, the miscommunication, and then we don't know, or not aware, or only get part of the story.
Yes.
So if we're agreeing on that, can we then call for 2 parts to get on that communication? 1, are we willing to be present at their meetings? And 2, are we suggesting that at least we ask them to have a liaison with our meetings? So it's 1 and 2. Are we agreeing to both? Because the 1, I'm always conscious that we're volunteers. I mean, the council is in a separate position altogether. They're elected and whatever. We're appointed. And are we appointed for 1 hour a week? Are we appointed for 10 hours a month? Yeah, it's a genuine concern for me. I have been in enough groups where volunteers get tired, and it's very easy for volunteers. They just walk away. They don't have to give you an explanation. You're going to cut their pay. There's no way. There is no holding somebody back from walking out if things don't fit. So they don't necessarily voice, volunteers don't necessarily voice their full feeling orally, they do it physically. So the one, are we willing to be there more often? It implicates more time. And yes, we're willing to sign up to be at Saturday, but these are Mondays. And if it were designated Monday, then we would take turns. That's the implication of that. How they handle our request to have a liaison is up to them. So I'm just the way my screen's working. I see column saying yes. I don't see the other faces, and I'm not sure why. Maybe it's because I'm sharing. No, I'm no longer sharing a screen. So maybe it was the last speaker.
I think it gets easier for us to get on what Katrina was saying about sort of being more in line with what city is doing. If we had 7 board members in their seats, I think when you have 5 members, there's more work for everybody. If you have 4 or 3 members, there's just too much for those members to do. So I think it should be easier if we reach this board's full number of seats too. Because you're right, it's a lot.
Yeah, if you're rotating 7 people for council meetings, that's once every 2 months or so. But although I mean the other thing is, I guess you can try and time when you show up at the meetings, or are you locked out? I'm not sure how it works with Zoom. Do they lock you out if you don't log in at the beginning? Oh, okay.
Okay. Well, if we had 7 members and it's a once a month assignment for one of us, that's once every 7 months. Once every 6 months, we each would go. So that commitment doesn't add very much to us.
Yeah, that's true.
All right. So we are going to talk about showing up at City Council soon. So maybe then the request to liaison is also part of that visit. Okay. All right. I want to deal with a second related issue to this, and that is, what do we believe as a statement when it comes to the guts of this issue? We 1 month ago were willing, and since we'd already voted a year ago, it didn't matter, that we weren't going to put it up to a vote up until today as to what are we proposing to City Council when it comes to members of the board with a felony conviction. And while it may be outside of the contract and it may be too late, I think it's still valid to put forward, because it did not seem like City Council had got through this. And the recommendation by a member of the public that they be part of the negotiation, the bargaining team, I haven't thought enough through that, but I think that they should know our opinion. And we didn't get to it fast enough.
I mean, we can still put it forward. We've already voted on it. So, putting it forward and letting the council, explain, and maybe we'll get more explanation as to why it was voted down, or why the letter was inserted or kept the way it was. And if it's something as simple as, their own, inexperience with it, as, because they're all relatively new to the council, maybe that's, as long as it's discussed and put on the record, I mean, that may be enough. That's maybe all we can hope for, I guess, at this point. I don't know what the implications would be if they were to change the ordinance, how that impacts the contract. I don't really know.
Well, I would argue, Tony, that it's not for me to know, in that I am not part of that negotiation team. I am not part of the contract except as to its implications. And therefore, putting forth our opinion is for them to consider how they're going to handle it.
Right.
Because they're the ones with the procedure and the binding agreement.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, it should be put forward and we'll hear what they have to say about it.
Okay.
But I
Is
don't
anyone disagreeing that we put forward our opinion that section should be struck?
So something that Tony said last meeting stuck with me because I had suggested that we strike both the disallowing of former police officers and something that Tony said that stuck with me. He said that we already get the position of the police. We're already getting their side of things very strongly here. And so I think that I've been thinking about that a lot, but since then, so then the last thing I might wonder is what about former police officers? Because you said this is a civilian police review board. And I think former police officers, I think they might have sort of an insight that we don't, and that felons don't, while also they're not beholden anymore to their teams, to their squads. And I think I wonder if you might consider allowing just former police officers. What would you think about that?
I'm on the fence about that because it's like once a police officer, you're always a police officer. That's how I think. Even though you're retired, you still have your same friends. You still, if you've been there for 20, 30 years, you're going to still think like a police officer, even though you might not have the same privileges and advantage like you do. So it would be good to have their insight, but if they were a jaded police officer or they just were a police officer that just did the job, it was just a job for them, and then their intent, their heart wasn't in it somewhere along the line, however many years they were in that police force, then they would not be effective. And it also depends on how they look at felons, regardless of what it is, what their history is. However, on the plus side, it would be beneficial to get another view from a police officer, something that you don't look at. Like there's two sides to every coin, two sides to every story. Sometimes there's a third side, and it would be nice, but it just depends on, we would have to do, me personally, a lot of research on the history of that policeman while they were in duty. What have they done since they've retired? Prior to me saying, hey, that would be a good person on the board.
Yeah.
Katrina, I'm going to agree with you, and I hope this sounds like an agreement. We're not ultimately responsible for appointing somebody to the board, and that balance is specific to the mayor. But as I think of our own deliberations amongst us five, Colum hasn't, recently joined, but Scotty was very present. I think there were times at which we influenced each other in our discussion, and we swayed each other. But whenever somebody had an idea that was a little bit off or a lot off, that person has been outvoted without too much blood. Maybe pain, ego, whatever. But it has happened more than a few times.
Right.
They each get outvoted. If I had a police officer, an ex-police officer, as another member of the board, and they expressed an opinion very, very forcefully, even amongst five, there's going to be four that say, thank you very much for your opinion. We vote against you. That is, isn't that the purpose of having a good board, that opinions can be expressed fully, and then we each abide by the fact that the board voted rather than I voted? And so for me, to strike both B and C, that portion of the former police officer part, I think city officials and present police officers are being represented. But I don't have any issue with another opinion being put forward in our deliberation. Because if that person does have an agenda, I don't know, maybe I've had an agenda at times and I've been voted down many times. So that's why I would say if there is a, what's it called, an intended balance of both, then that for me would definitely be a, okay, then let's do both. And if you want to argue it still, then you have to argue why yours is better than the others. So anyway, that's my opinion. Shall we put forward a motion and then see if we can agree on vote as to what to do? And I'm okay with either one, either motion, you know, a broader one or a more narrow one. But I think we need to come to a recorded conclusion.
How about we could start with a motion to strike, to put forth language to the city council to strike both C and the former police officer language from B. And I would say if that gets voted down, if the board disagrees with me, then I'm happy to put forth language to the city council for just this, just striking C. So if we voted maybe in that order, would that make sense?
I think I hear a motion from you, Colum.
I think Tony wanted to say something first.
Didn't we already vote to put forward just striking C? I mean, we haven't been able to do that. So I would say we do that first and see what the council does with that. Since we've already done that, we haven't heard from them on that because we've had some issues getting it in front of them. You know, that I mean, if we're gonna do, I don't think we need to vote because we've already voted. And if we're gonna vote again to put a different change to the ordinance, and then we're gonna have two changes in front of council, that, you know, I mean, they could decide that themselves, I guess, but it seems confusing if we put two different proposed changes to the ordinance to them.
It's hard to say, Tony, but let me say this. A year ago, Colum wasn't here. I don't remember who else might not have been here. But the present stance of the board, I think, ought to have a fair vote on the present members of the board. If we come to agree on only one of the sections, I'm okay with, or, you know, striking part of B is fine with me. But I think that now, let's say it's just Colum. If he's going to say yes, then he ought to have an opportunity to vote. A revote in this case, I was looking for the minutes here as to what exactly we voted on. But it is a different council and it is a different board just by removing or adding one, because it does change the actual, did it pass the full board or not? So if you don't mind, we can by vote reject Colum's first proposal, if that's what it turns out to be, and then we can come back to just B and saying let it stand.
Okay.
Okay. So I hear the motion by Colum. So if you want to word it to say strike, let me get the numbers I was writing down.
So I can say it again. I'd like a motion to put forth our stance to city council in our language, saying that we would like to strike 19-22C and part of 19-22B, in that we would strike the restriction for former law enforcement officials from serving on the CPRB.
Thank you. Do I hear a second for that motion? The procedure, I think, makes me a member of the board too, so I would like to second it. And therefore, Katrina, Tony, Colum, we're voting on removing C plus a section of B. Okay. Carla, could you take a quick vote?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Mr. Diaz,
Yes.
Mr. Allegretti,
No.
Ms. Kendall,
No.
Mr. Wilson.
Yes.
Okay, so the motion doesn't pass. So now we can let stand just the removal of C unless somebody wants to call another vote.
Yeah, so it sounded like Tony said we don't need to vote on this other one. We've already voted, so we can just put that forward if I understood right.
Yeah, I mean, I can move that we put it forward in front of the board if we want to do that, but I think we kind of already accomplished that.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. So when we visit the board, then that will be part of our recommendation. If we need to do the legalese for it, but that's okay too. But I think that that's ultimately their responsibility as long as we declare intention. And it's our intention is rejected, ignored, or whatever else, at least the satisfaction of having it put forward is as we can. If anybody wants to come back with other tactics afterwards, then that's okay. But at least this part will be done. Okay.